Hi, thank you so much for coming. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Over 24 books have been written about Huey Pierce Long. His life, his politics, his assassination have all been very well documented. And if you're here, my guess is you have some knowledge of who he was. My name is Claire Bateman, and I first heard about this story about Huey's assassination in the 8th grade. Recognizing the Pavy name as a family name in my Louisiana history book, I had some questions. My parents were tight-lipped and said things like, "No one knows anything for certain, and it's not polite to talk about it." So that was that. We had a family secret. Except books were written and movies were made about our family secret. Pretty crazy. What I want to do tonight is to introduce you to this family. And I want to share with you the research journey that I took in writing my book, The Heresy of Virtue. This is a picture of my Aunt Ida Boudreaux and my Uncle Albert. So Ida is the youngest child of Judge Benjamin Pavy from Opelousas. And Judge Pavy was an arch enemy of Senator Long. Their rivalry was very well known. It was no secret. Ida is what was known as a change of life baby. Judge Pavy and his wife had 6 children over a span of 12 years. And 11 years later, they had my Aunt Ida. Ida married my dad's brother. And in 2010, Ida, by the way, is spelled like Ida with an umlaut over the I, began to tell me stories about her sister, Yvonne Pavy Weiss. Specifically, she began to tell me about Yvonne's wedding day. Ida was 10 years old when Yvonne married Carl Austin Weiss. It was a small family wedding which took place in Opelousas on a Tuesday morning, just 3 days after Christmas. She remembered the flowers Yvonne carried, the dresses she and her sisters wore, and even the toasts that family members made. 18 months after their wedding, on June 7th, their son Carl Austin Weiss Jr. was born. They called him Karlchen, which is German for little Carl. This is their only family portrait. It was taken when Karlchen was 2 days old by Carl. That's his hand at the bottom of the picture. 12 weeks later, his father would be shot 61 times by Long's bodyguards. Whoops. My aunt was 11 years old when this happened, and she remembered the relatives and friends who came to their home on the night of the shooting, and that it was her job to answer the phone and the door from there on after. The thinking was a reporter wouldn't badger a child who said there was no one home to be interviewed. By the end of my first conversation with her, I asked her if I could begin interviewing her once a week so I could put our family secret on paper. She agreed. I began doing research on my own, and the following week I drove to Opelousas. For the first few months, she would tell me stories, and I would go back and do my best to find a way to corroborate what she told me. And I have to say, her memory was pretty remarkable. This is my, oops. Something's not working. Okay. This is Marie. This is the sister closest in age to Ida. She was 11 years older than Ida was. And Marie was a school teacher who lost her job the week before the shooting. Now, Ida didn't know why Marie lost her job, but she did know it had something to do with her family being anti-Long. So my job was to go find out what really happened. And here's how it worked. In the 12 months preceding his death, Huey Long, a United States senator, called 7 extraordinary or special legislative sessions in the state of Louisiana. During those sessions, a total of 426 new laws were passed. One of these laws established what was called the State Budget Committee. The State Budget Committee was made up of Huey Long, of Governor O.K. Allen, and one other legislator. And the law required that every entity that received state funds, and that meant every sanitation department, every school board, every sheriff's office, every fire department, district attorney's office, highway workers had to submit their budget to the State Budget Committee. The committee would review each budget and summarily delete the largest ticket item by firing everybody on their payroll. Then they would rehire only those employees who were loyal to Long and willing to give him 10% of their salary for his campaign fund. That was the deduct. Whoops. This is Tom Ed Weiss. This is Carl's baby brother. Tom and Carl were 10 years apart. It's just enough time to either love each other or hate each other's guts, and they were the former. Tom had a great respect for his older brother, and when Carl and Yvonne were married, Tom was 18 years old, a freshman in college at LSU studying pre-med. By the time Annie, Di, and I were working on the project, Tom had retired from a successful practice in rheumatology. Tom has a story about the night of the shooting that is very important because it has remained consistent from 1935 until the time he died. And so if you'll bear with me, I'm going to tell you Tom's story. On that Sunday, Tom and his fraternity brothers had spent the afternoon in Hammond looking for a band to hire for a party they were having the following week. When they returned from Hammond to Baton Rouge, the special session was already in progress, and according to Tom, Huey was the most entertaining ticket in town, and they wanted to see the show. The boys circled the Capitol in vain, looking for a parking spot, and suddenly they noticed a shift. Cars were leaving, people were walking down the street, people were leaving the building, and they found themselves gridlocked in traffic in front of the State Times building. There were a group of reporters standing outside, and when Tom asked them what was going on, one reporter answered, "Huey's been shot. The shooter was a Dr. Weiss." Tom immediately thought of his father and ran to their family home. On arriving, he was relieved to see his father standing on the front porch, but then realized the only other Dr. Carl Weiss that he knew of was his brother. The elder Dr. Weiss had heard about the shooting on the radio during Walter Winchell's 10 o'clock news show. Thankfully, Mrs. Weiss had already gone to bed, so Tom's father went outside, expecting to be contacted by the police or some authority about the details of the shooting, or at the very least, notification that what he'd heard on the radio was true, that Carl had been killed. But that never happened. A medical school friend of Carl's who lived in New Orleans called the house when he heard the news. And Yvonne had called, asking if her in-laws had seen Carl, who was supposed to return the family Buick to their house after he made his hospital rounds. She said there were strangers lurking in her yard and digging in her trash cans. The phone crackled on both calls so badly that the conversations were cut short. Tom and Dr. Weiss needed to get to Yvonne's. Not wanting to leave Mrs. Weiss alone, Tom tried calling his cousin, Jimmy Brousseau, who lived nearby, to ask him to come stay with his mother. But by then, the phone was completely dead. So they turned out the lights, and they locked the doors, and they rushed over to Lakeland Drive, where Jimmy stood outside, making sure no one got to Yvonne, other than family. Yvonne was frantic when she opened the door, and she fainted when they told her Carl had been killed. The elder Dr. Weiss attended to her and sent Tom and Jimmy to find the family car. The two cousins drove Jimmy's car to the empty Capitol parking lot. By this time, there were so few cars in the lot that Carl's stood out, and it was right in front of the front doors of the Capitol. Tom jumped into the front seat, and when he reached to start the car, there were no keys in the ignition. They must have been in Carl's pocket, he thought. He sent Jimmy back to get another set of keys, and while Tom waited with the car, he saw a funeral hearse come to the Capitol and followed it to the back entrance. He just wanted to get a view of what happened. He just wanted some understanding of who was being put in that car and what had happened that night. Afraid of being seen, he ran back to the front parking lot, only to find the car was gone. When Jimmy returned, they drove around the area until they found the car shoved into a stand of azalea bushes. Tom had to scramble through the passenger side of the car, and as he crawled over the seat, he noticed the surgical instruments from Carl's bag, which would have normally been rolled very neatly in gauze, were strewn about the vehicle. The glove box had been rummaged through, and on the floorboard was an empty sock, which he recognized as the one Carl used to cover his gun. 19 years old. Tom drove the car home, and as he got to his father's house, he saw Monsignor Gassler leaving their house. Now, Monsignor Gassler was the priest at what's now St. Joseph's Cathedral. And Carl and Tom had both been altar servers for him. He was very close to the family. The funeral home director, Mr. Rabenhorst, had been trying to reach Dr. Weiss to let him know that Carl's body had been delivered to that funeral home. But because the phone lines had been cut, he couldn't get through. So Mr. Rabenhorst contacted Monsignor Gassler, and Monsignor Gassler went to the Weiss house to let them know. Here's a layout of a map of the neighborhood. And you can see the Capitol grounds here. The block just next to it with the 1, 2, 3 on it. Number 1 is Carl and Yvonne's house. And number 3 is where Jimmy lived. If you go south here, you see the 4, 5, and 6. That's where the church is still. Number 6 is where the rectory was at the time. And directly behind it, number 5, is where the elder Weisses lived. The story I heard is that they shared a clothesline. Oops. Okay, Tom's story brings to the forefront a couple of pretty good questions. And one is, did Carl have a gun? Did someone take the gun out of his car? And the second question, or the third question, is, what happened to his car keys? This is where my research got fun. Tom Ed never believed Carl had his gun with him. But in real time, there was no way for him to know what everybody else knew, or who knew what, really, for that matter. I have the benefit of 90 years of a slow trickle of information. So what I'm going to do tonight is take these issues, this issue of the gun, and guide you through what's been revealed over the 90 years. So, we know the shooting occurred at 9:20, and Huey was taken to Our Lady of the Lake from there. Just before his surgery, which happened somewhere between 11 and 12 that night, he said, "No statements. I will make the statements." But the people who were in the room to receive that order were his closest political allies. There was James Noe, there was Justice John Fournette, there was Governor O.K. Allen. The people who weren't in the room were the bodyguards. They were still at the Capitol dealing with the scene of the shooting. But the Times-Picayune ran an extra the next morning. And in it quotes several unnamed guards and other prolonged witnesses who still happen to be around the building. I believe that this information that came out the very next day is the closest thing to the truth that we ever got. So here's a picture of the extra. And in the extra, this is fabulous. So there was the Reverend Gerald Smith. Does that name sound familiar to anybody? So Gerald Smith was the guy who was organizing Huey's Share Our Wealth program. And the Share Our Wealth program was Huey's idea for the redistribution of wealth. Every man a king. You know, you may have heard that slogan. So Reverend Smith was at the shooting, so say, and he wrote this piece for the newspaper, which is his eyewitness account. And I'm only going to do the pull-out quote because it's right here. He says, "I heard Long cry out, and then I heard a shot." Okay, so just remember that. The next person who spoke up was James O'Connor, who was the Public Service Commissioner. And he said he whirled around when he heard the first shot fired, and he saw Senator Long struggling with his assailant. He goes on to say, Senator Long staggered toward me and said he'd been shot. Then I heard rapid firing. I saw a trickle of blood coming from Senator Long's lips, and I realized he'd been wounded. So I accompanied him down the stairs and took him to Our Lady of the Lake. Another unnamed guard said that Carl's gun was a Spanish gun. It was a Spanish outlaw gun, which means there was a serial number on it that had been scratched out. And this is what people did who didn't own their guns properly. It was probably a stolen gun, or I can't even imagine what else. But that gun was the gun Carl used, and that it had jammed during the shooting. Okay, so those are the things we know. Also that next day, Coroner Byrd is quoted. So the coroner is called to the Capitol to identify the body. And the coroner says that he picked up the gun and there was one bullet in the chamber. Okay, now I don't know if you recall that picture I showed you of the gun, but the picture of the gun is the gun and 5 bullets. So not sure how that happened, but just want to point that out. So Coroner Byrd not only said he picked up a gun with 1 bullet in the chamber, but he also called an inquest. And just a little clarification on the inquest. The inquest was into the death of Dr. Weiss. It was not about who shot Huey Long. Okay, so these questions that he had for the witnesses to the shooting, who were all the bodyguards, were about what happened to Dr. Weiss. Okay, and on that first day of the inquest, the bodyguards did not go. But what we did see in the newspaper is an article that said that General Louis Gare, who was the head of the state police, called a meeting of the guards and told them not to speak. Okay? Now they're under the gag order. Okay? Eight days later is the first time the guards show up to answer questions at the inquest. It was called 5 separate times. On the 5th time, they showed up. And that was on September the 16th. Now, on this same day, this note gets delivered to the Weisses from the hospital. And what I don't think people understood then is that the Weisses were physicians. They were well loved and they were well respected. And so there was this channel of information going directly to them. And this was a nurse who was on duty, and she wrote this. I'm not going to make you try to read that because it's really hard, but she says, Dr. Vadrine asked him, how about this place on your lip? And Long answered, that's where he hit me. On September 16th, the Weisses also get word that Carl's possessions that were on his body at the time of the shooting are available at the sheriff's office. It's important to note that the sheriff and the coroner were both anti-Long. Tom was sent to the sheriff's office to get Carl's belongings, thinking he would get the keys. Instead, he was given some change, maybe $5, a pocket knife, and a pen. He asked the woman if there were any keys. And when she went back to look, she came back and said, there are no keys, but the gun is here. And to his dying day, Tom does not know why he did not accept that gun. He said he was scared, he was embarrassed, there were other people in the room, he didn't want to carry a gun, and he left it there. So here's the inquest. The first witness is Justice John Fournette, and he says basically no words were spoken. Carl walked straight up to Long, put a gun in his abdomen, and then the melee ensued. The next witness was Reverend Smith. You remember him. He wrote his own story in the newspaper. He was so excited to be part of the deal. And I am guessing that by this point there was a story that needed to be told and it didn't match the one that the Reverend had already said, and he didn't want to perjure himself, but he stood up and he said, I want to say I respect your court, but I do not respect this investigation. And I brand the district attorney of this court as one of the conspirators to murder Long. I worshiped my hero. I will say nothing here, and I will not harass these boys who are here in any way. So he excused himself without saying much of much. The next person called was Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook was the attending surgeon. And he was asked about Huey's lip. So the lip was discussed. He repeated what the nurse had said, and that's where he hit me. It's important to note that the witnesses were not sequestered. So if the DA found a weakness in one story, the next guard could make up for it. Like this. Officer Coleman was called. And his testimony was that Carl stepped up from off to the side, pulled a gun, and shot Long. Coleman ran up and struck the man that had the pistol, missed, and he thinks he must have hit Huey. "25 years later, these two books come out to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the shooting. The interesting thing is that these stories are released when there's no transcript of the inquest, no gun, no hospital records, no formal investigation, and no police file or evidence from the scene of the crime. These books are based on interviews of the same witnesses who testified at the inquest. Now, their stories vary a little bit, but it's 25 years. I mean, don't ask me what I got yesterday at the grocery store. So that's forgivable. Both books question whether or not Huey was hit. David Zinman, who wrote The Day Huey Long Was Shot, the Paveys loved him. He is the first person who asked them for their side of the story. He is the first person who was interested in their grief, in how their 12-week-old son was. He interviewed the 12-week-old son. And consequently, this book is the first place that Tom's story is ever published. Deutsch's book, Deutsch was a reporter in New Orleans for the State Times, maybe. I don't remember what is it, Melissa? I'm sure you know. Times-Picayune in New Orleans at the time. And he was also Long's press secretary. He was very enmeshed with the guards and with Huey's allies. In Deutsch's book is the first mention of black blood. And believe me, I tried to find it. He says, during the special session after the shooting, so just a little bit of history, Long shot, Carl dies, Carl's funeral is the very next day, and the legislature is still holding their special session. One of the legislators is a Pavy, and he is there to cast his vote as well. So Deutsch says, during the special session after the shooting, I took occasion to go to Dr. Pavy's desk and ask whether he had reached any conclusions as to Carl's motive. I had heard reports that it was felt in some corners Huey had planned a racial slur. Now, let's take a look at that slur. Here is the family tree. And you can see here Benjamin Henry Pavy in the middle is married to Ida Catherine Vise. Their fifth child, Yvonne, marries Carl, and they have Carl Austin Jr. Okay? But this is the tree everybody wants to see. If you go up the tree, Judge Benjamin Pavy's grandfather, Dr. A.O. Guidry, had an affair. And from that affair, with his mulatto mistress, he had 3 daughters. This had been made public when the judge first ran for office in 1907, but he won that election, and he won every election for the next quarter century. So 50 years after the shooting, Huey Long's son, Russell, is a United States Senator, and he introduces the transcript into the official record on the Senate floor. He makes no mention of how it came to be in his possession or where it had been for the past 50 years. And while there were questions, I believe this is where the tide of information began to turn. At the same time, the 50th anniversary, Marjorie Roll worked for the Times-Picayune, And she wrote an article where she interviewed Dr. Dudley Stewart. Now, I didn't say his name in the beginning, but Dudley was Carl's med school friend who called right after the shooting. He said the following day he went to his office where 2 state police officers were waiting for him and tried to force him to sign a document saying that Carl had become a socialist. When he refused, they beat him. And the only way he got them to stop beating him is because he knew a pediatrician who worked on Long's campaign. And when he called him, the beating stopped. But the next day, he went back to work, and they were there, and they had a new affidavit, or they had a warrant charging him as an accessory to the murder. So this information is not released for 50 years. This man doesn't talk. This educated, smart, well-respected man. A little side note is that the Weisses had asked Dudley to be a pallbearer, and they never heard back from him. And he said he was too badly beaten, he couldn't have come anyway, but he was scared as well. Now, Senator Long sent this letter to Tom Ed after he met Carl Jr. And you follow that? That's a lot of people. So Senator Long had already made acquaintance with Tom Ed. They were around the same age. But Russell wanted to meet Carl's son. So he met Carl Jr. and he wrote this letter to Tom Ed after their meeting saying how nice it was to meet Carl and that they shared a personal tragedy. But the wording in this paragraph is so unique to me. It says, "It was my fortune to know some of the eyewitnesses and respect them. I do not want to do anything to cast doubt on what they testified under oath. Yet I remain in the view that only the Eternal could know what happened and why it happened as it did." So things were beginning to loosen up. And this letter is dated, can you see when it's dated? 1993. So the 50th anniversary was 85, now this is 93. Sometime after that, sometime after Carl Jr. and Senator Russell Long met, Carl Jr. received a phone call from a woman who was selling what she claimed to be his father's gun. Now, this woman claims that she has the gun and that she had already offered it to Senator Russell Long, who didn't want it, and she thought maybe Carl would want to buy it just to have. Well, he declined as well. When the woman died, the gun was found in her estate, along with an investigative file from the shooting. Her name was Mabel Gare Bennings. She was the daughter of General Lewis Gare, who had been the head of the state police in 1935 and in charge of the investigation into this shooting. This is a picture of Colonel Francis Grevenberg. He was the state superintendent of the state police in the 50s, and he was hired by Governor McKinnon, and they were a reform team. He cleaned up gambling and prostitution all over the state. I mean, he was very popular with some and very unpopular with others, but he was cleaning out the graft. During his tenure, he was on a trip to Shreveport with some of the troopers who were present the night of the shooting. One of them, Officer John D. Ormond, said the guards had raided a gambling hall a few nights before the shooting, and he confiscated a small Spanish pistol during the raid. He thought the gun would be good for his wife, but it wasn't working properly, so he took it with him and planned to have it repaired. A few nights later, after the shooting, when they realized Carl has no gun, he went to his car and got this Spanish pistol and laid it on the floor. Grevenberg wanted to launch an investigation, but was told he would lose his job if he did. He said that the finding of the Bennings file 30 years later is what finally made him come forward. This is a copy of his apology letter to Tom Ed. And to me, the most compelling part is that he didn't even consider what this family had felt or suffered through, not only with the loss of their loved one, but the pall of being in a family with an assassinator. So, in the end, my parents were right. No one knows for sure what happened. And this is not the story I read in my 8th grade history book, which was no words were spoken and that he was motivated by a racial slur. Time shows us that it's questionable. That it's questionable if he had a gun, that it's questionable if you can hit someone in the face and then shoot them afterwards, that the testimony of the guards is questionable. Time shows us that Our Lady of the Lake was giving information to the Weiss family that no one else had. Time shows us that the investigation, or the lack thereof, was missing vital information. So the story that I've written, The Heresy of Virtue, merges these stories. And the gun's just one example. There are many, many, many other half-truths, partial truths, new information, and I'm able to give a much fuller picture of what really happened. And so, if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Thank you. Yes?
Why did Carl go up to the Capitol that day?
That's a good question, and I believe I know the answer, but I'm not going to tell you. You have to buy the book. And let me say this: the book is not published. It's finished. I've written it, and I'm looking for an agent. I need an agent who publishes historical fiction. So if you know of anyone, let me know. I'd love to reach out. Yeah.
I have another. The gun.
Huh?
Now, in Don Pavy's book, he says there was no blood on the gun. So when you press a gun to someone and pull the trigger, and then weren't all the bullets recovered in that safe deposit box with the lady had?
Okay, so that's two things. First of all, the gun had no blood on it, and I loved Donald. Great, another Pavy physician. The gun, there was no chain of custody on this gun. And so, I mean, there's not really any way to say that that's a problem.
Well, when you say the gun was scratched off the number,
that would be a different gun.
Yeah, that does not sound like the Weiss's.
No, and the gun that Mabel tried to sell and the one that's now in the museum has a serial number. It's a totally different gun.
Now,
yeah.
As a member of the Weiss family, I've heard this story my whole life, and the black cloud over the family all these many years has been something, and I want to thank you for doing this, because this story has unraveled over the many years, and you know, there were so many longies in the state that kept the lie going for so long.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you for doing this.
Well, you're welcome. It has been an honor.
Get your book.
Thank you. It's been an honor. Yes. Mm-hmm. Correct. When she died and those documents and the gun were discovered, Carl Jr. sued for the gun. And he won, but he had to put the gun on permanent loan at the museum.
So that's the gun that they did not shoot.
That's the gun that belonged to Carl Austin Weiss. That's about all I can tell you about that gun.
What about the documents?
The documents were used, you know, actually, I don't really know. I don't know that they've been open to the public. There was one photograph in there that was a photograph of Huey's jacket that had holes in it, but it's a photograph. And, you know, I have a picture of him in the extra, and he's wearing a white suit, and this one's gray. So I don't really know what, you know, I can't really tell you much. There was a whole, the state police reopened the investigation, and when they did, they revisited the official transcript from the inquest, and they concluded that Carl did it. They never interviewed they didn't interview Tom Ed, they didn't interview the nurses who gave the affidavits, they didn't, you know, so believe me, there's so many avenues we could go down that are crazy like that. Well, first of all, in the official version, there were no bullets in his body. He was shot one time and it went all the way through. That's the official version. The hospital records still are not found. So we don't know that there's a different story. There was an interview done of Mr. Uberlocker, who was the undertaker at the time. And he says that when he was about to embalm Huey's body, Dr. Vadrine, I believe it was Dr. Vadrine, don't hold me to that, but came into the room and pushed him out of the way, reopened the wound, dug his hand out, and pulled a 38 out of Huey's body. So that's speculation. Again, that's not anybody who was interviewed by the state police when they reopened the case. The other thing is in Mrs. Benning's estate, the gun was found, I believe, with 5 or 6 bullets with it. And one was a spent shell casing. And when they tested the gun with another bullet, it didn't match. And so no one really knows what that bullet was, you know, where it came from. So that's all so many questions.
Your book is a historical fiction, so it's not an attempt to try and address that.
It is historical fiction, and this is how I explain that to people, is that on the night of the shooting, I know that the Pavys sent the mother and the brother to Baton Rouge to be with Yvonne and Marie. I don't know what they said in the car, but I use that 40-minute car ride to give the reader background information that's pertinent to knowing the family. So that's how I fictionalize it. He does.
In terms of writing historical fiction like this, how is the reader supposed to distinguish the fiction from what is supposed to be fact? And how do you add to the mythology of this without further muddying the waters?
Well, that's a very good question, a very fair question. I am from the Boudreaux side, and we are nothing but storytellers. So sticking to the facts is very hard for me. This is probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. The thing is that there are so many questions still unanswered, and you may find somewhere where you really believe a witness or a witness's daughter, or that this family story has been passed down, but you can't prove it. And so I really, really tried to stay as true to this family as I could. I am really related to the Pavys by marriage and the Weisses, and I took my job very seriously. I felt like these families had been totally disregarded and had suffered. And so I when I felt like I was getting close to the truth and I couldn't put my, nail the nail all the way in, I went with my gut. And so that's...
Really, it's like, everybody walked out of Oliver Stone's movie thinking that they knew exactly what happened to JFK. Because it was historical fiction.
Right, and at the same time, I might add that the people who were on the Warren Commission came out very convincingly saying how that it was malarkey and so forth and so on, and they've been proven wrong. So, over time, so this is 90 years. This happened 90 years ago. and a lot of covering up. Yes, ma'am.
What's the evolution of your title?
Oh my gosh, it's been so many things. I just was at a workshop in New York, and this is the latest thing. And so the Heresy of Virtue is basically that you would be virtuous to come forward with the truth that you know, but you can't. Absolutely, I would love to. So this is the part of the story that really drew me in. So after the shooting, Yvonne had stayed at LSU and finished her master's degree. She was surveilled, she was followed, she was threatened. There were death threats mailed to her, death threats to her son. And she went ahead and got her master's degree in Romance languages anyway. She graduated in 1937, and she was blackballed. She could not get a teaching job anywhere. She was a single mother. She had a professor who was pretty well known. His last name was Stevenson, and he had started the Journal of Southern History, and she was his research assistant. And he had a contact at Columbia. She applied to the PhD program, and she left Louisiana for Columbia. Now the myth is, oh, she needed to escape the... Yvonne was beautiful, and she could command a room, but she was no shy violet. I mean, she was very smart and very determined to make a life for herself. She went to get her, she moved to New York, and after 2 years finished her coursework and had decided on her research topic for her dissertation, which was Louisiana in French letters. So she was studying the letters of De Soto and the other explorers who would write back to their kings and queens about what they were discovering in Louisiana. And as such, she needed to go to France to finish her research. Unfortunately for her, it was May of 1939. She boards a ship in New York and takes her almost 4-year-old son with her to France and starts her research. While she's there, consequently, there's a lovely story about her going to the American hospital in Paris where Carl had done an internship. And I do talk about this in the book, where she is so warmly received, and all of the doctors and nurses there tell her, you know, how wonderful they thought Carl was, and her loss is really reaffirmed from them. Anyway, in August of 1939, France and England declare war on Germany, and all foreigners are asked to leave the country. Yvonne decides not to. She has a friend who has a country home in the Loire Valley. She goes to the Loire Valley with her son and hides there, and they plan to pretend like she's an American relative. But she has a name that's given her so much trouble at home that only causes more now in France. So the French police are aware of her German, Jewish last name, and she starts to, you know, get under their microscope. And in the end, she has to decide if she knows she's endangering this family and putting herself and Carlton in danger. And you know, while it's 1939 there, it's 1939 here. And in 1939 here, all of Huey's people are getting indicted. The gambling, the graft is starting to get exposed. And Tom-Ed, who's doing his own investigation in Louisiana, is afraid for her to come home. So anyway, that's what happened to her.
So did she come home?
Oh, she came home. She came home, and she finished her work in her PhD, you know, all of that. And when I was doing my research, everything refers to her as Dr. Yvonne Pavy Weiss Bourgeois. She remarried. And so I went to Columbia to get her transcript, and there's no PhD. She went back to school in the 50s and got her Master's of Library Science, but there's no PhD. So I wrote a letter. Oh, I asked Andy Da, what happened here? Why are we calling her doctor when she's not a doctor? And Andy Da said she had finished everything, and that she needed $500 to be able to get her PhD, and she didn't have it. She just didn't have $500. So I'm like, okay. So I go to Columbia. I reach out to the dean of Romance languages there, and we also had a carbon copy of the dissertation. So I bring the carbon copy of the dissertation to the faculty at Columbia, and I ask if she can get a posthumous PhD, and they sort of laugh at me. That's not how it works. You have to complete your coursework, you have to confer, and you have to defend your thesis. And if she didn't do all three of those, we'll keep this, but it's not going to do her any good. And she has to publish the dissertation was the other requirement. So this sweet secretary who worked in the French department told me to wait, and she went up in the attic. She comes down with this box, and there's a card catalog like your mom kept her recipes in. And in there is a little index card, and it has conferred, check, defended, check, all of the requirements. And she defended her thesis, I recognize the date, 2 days before her father died. So I imagine she had to leave and go tend to that. But it still didn't answer the $500, and Ida had not been wrong. She hadn't told me one story that I couldn't find the truth on. So I went to the special collections there, and I got a student catalog from 1939 or whenever it was. It might have been 40. And the requirements for your dissertation, which are normally to print 2 or 3 copies of your dissertation, required 75 copies, which would have cost $500. So when I told the dean that, he was very excited. They still had to approve the dissertation, but they did, and she got a posthumous PhD. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for asking that question. Carlton grew up. He was very smart. He went to Lycée Français in New York when he was young, and then went to Holy Cross College at like 16, I think. He went to medical school, and he became an orthopedic surgeon. He was the first orthopedist to have an MRI machine in his own office. He died not too long ago. He was a great guy, really super guy.
Did he live in
No, he stayed in Long Island. As a matter of fact, Yvonne stayed in New York. She never came home. Now, Carlton would come to Louisiana, to Opelousas, to see Marie and Ida every summer until he was probably 19 years old. He would spend his summers here. Is that all? Oh. Exhumed. Mm-hmm. That is another big, and I do not cover any of that in my book, by the way. I want to say my book ends when Carlton is maybe 11 years old. So, but his body was exhumed, and Carl Jr. told me, he said, today's the first day I'll see my father. Isn't that interesting? Right. So he was exhumed, and you can read about that. It's Dr. Starrs, Ken Starrs, is that right? Do you remember? And what he was really looking for was like a hairline fracture in Carl's hand to prove that he had punched him, even though that would not have proved he punched him. I don't think he found that. And they also did a toxicology on him, and there were no drugs or alcohol in his system. They were able to, from his skeleton, tell you how many wounds there were. It was pretty gruesome. Yes?
I read that Dr. Rudy DePass out of New Orleans,
Uh-huh.
he was the person that was kind of the matchmaker for them, and selected Dr. Weiss and his to-be wife as part of this trip to Paris. When they went to Paris and they went to Vienna, and people say that like he may have purchased that pistol in Paris.
Okay.
Is there any mythos?
Okay, so here's the truth about that. Carl graduated from Tulane Medical School in the early 30s, and he left and went to study surgery under the masters in Vienna. And he traveled all around. He kept a great journal. He read a lot. He drew. He was a fabulous sketch artist. And Dr. Mattis was part of that trip. Yvonne, he left, he practiced, studied in Vienna, worked at the American Hospital in Paris, and then went to do a residency at Bellevue in New York. After he had returned to New York, Yvonne was selected to go be in the World's Fair, in the Louisiana Exposition in the World's Fair in Paris. And she stayed in Paris and studied at the Sorbonne. They were not there at the same time. The way they met, though, is Yvonne was in school and at the beginning of her master's degree, and her eyes were giving her trouble. She went to go see the elder Dr. Weiss for her eyesight, and when she told him about her experience in Paris, he said, "Oh, you have to meet my son." And as a matter of fact, she went home from that doctor's appointment and told Marie she had met the man she would marry. And he didn't call her for like 6 months because he was scared. Yeah. Anything else? Thank you so much.